Chapter 411, 411 seems to be of Balaam lineage, a university lecturer. It really is Mr. Isaac, not someone sharing the same name. Using the information provided by Old Kohler, Klein basically confirmed that the person the bounty was aimed at was the suspected descendant of death, Isaac. Here lies the problem. Who or what organization is looking for Mr. Isaac? The numinous episcopate whose ultimate goal is to revive death. Insangwil who likes to play the mastermind behind the scenes. It's unlikely to be the latter. Insangwil has sealed Artifact 0-08, which allows a target to act according to his descriptions, and through a series of coincidences, he can achieve his desired objective. There's no need at all for him to use the gangs and bounty hunters to find Mr. Isaac. Wait, what if this is actually an arrangement by sealed Artifact 0-08? Realizing that he's now the target of Mr. Isaac but lacks the confidence to clinch victory in battle, Insangwil is using 0-08 to instigate conflict between Mr. Isaac and some particular faction, hoping to eliminate his enemy indirectly. And this reward was issued by that faction. It's very possible. However, I can't rule out the numinous episcopate. To get revenge, Mr. Isaac might have made contact with them. However, there were major differences between the two parties regarding the resurrection of death, which eventually led to a falling out. Klein instantly thought of two possibilities and the corresponding reasons. He took a sip of his coffee and said to Old Kohler, "Help me find out who issued this bounty and its exact price. If it's appropriate, I'll take note of it while I'm at it." "No problem." Old Kohler didn't feel that anything was amiss with Klein's request. From a certain perspective, there were no essential differences between a private detective and a bounty hunter. The only difference was that the former would involve themselves in trivial matters such as catching adulterers in the act, finding cats, and helping others walk dogs, while they tended to use the powers of deduction more than brute force. When Old Kohler finished describing what he had seen and heard, Klein briefly taught him some of the tricks of leading a conversation based on the Nighthawk's curriculum, as well as the contingency plans for specific scenarios. "It's time for me to go to the docks. Thank you, Detective Moriarty, for allowing me to lead a good life once again." Old Kohler picked up the old, worn-out hat on the table and thanked him sincerely. The detective, in his view, not only provided him with a well-paid job, but he also taught him many useful things. Even if the detective no longer needed him as an informant, the skills he learned would allow him to barely survive in East Borough, especially since he was growing older and less capable of laborious work. A good life? In my opinion, what you have now is the basics of what a person should have. After watching Old Kohler walk out the cheap coffee house, Klein sat there in a daze. This was the first time that he had heard a friend's name from someone else since his arrival in Backlund, and it was also the first time that he might have grasped Insangwil's whereabouts. For the past 3 months, Klein's main goal had been to digest the potion and enhance himself, especially after he killed Lenivas. That was because he knew very well that he and Insangwil, who was most likely a high-sequence beyonder, had an unbridgeable gap. He couldn't be impatient for revenge, especially when it came to the chilling sealed Artifact 0-08. He didn't even have the intention to approach and investigate it. Scenes from the Blackthorn Security Company in Tingen replayed themselves in Klein's mind, and those bright polished shoes clearly appeared before his eyes. Raising his head and slowly letting out a breath, Klein took his scarf and hat and walked out of the cheap coffee shop. Hillston Borough, outside a rather old building. Klein got off the carriage, pressed his hat, and went straight to the door. It was Isengard Stanton's house. The great detective had written to Klein a few days ago, inviting him to come over to discuss a murder case. Mr. Klein, who has been busy with the financing of the bike project, tactfully replied that he had no time to spare as a form of rejection. To his surprise, Isengard Stanton didn't seem to mind and said that the case had hit a brick wall, making it unlikely that there would be any breakthroughs anytime soon. He was very willing to wait for Detective Sherlock Moriarty's visit and expressed how he looked forward to an exchange that ignited sparks of wisdom. As such, Klein could only first divine a suitable date for the visit, picking the closest date after the negotiations, which happened to be this afternoon. With that, he wrote back and fixed an appointment. Ding dong, ding dong. Klein rang the bell twice and stepped back to wait. More than 10 seconds later, the door creaked open, and the assistant of the great detective, Isengard, said with a smile, "Good afternoon, Detective Moriarty. Mr. Stanton is waiting for you in the activity room. Would you like coffee or tea?" The assistant was thin and wore gold-rimmed glasses. He looked both refined and professional. Klein looked up at him and said, "Tea. Be sparing on the lemon slices." "No problem." The assistant led Klein into the living room, pointed to the activity room and said, "Sorry, our servants are only temporary, and they just happen to be on their day off today, so I can only trouble you to go over alone." Klein nodded and walked towards the activity room on the first floor. As he lifted his hand to knock on the door, he suddenly felt that something was amiss. "I arranged a visit with Mr. Stanton a few days in advance. Why would I chance upon the temporary servant's day off?" Klein's eyes narrowed, and he pulled out a copper penny. At this moment, the door to the activity room opened due to the knock, producing a tiny crack. In the blink of an eye, as if some seal was lifted, the strong smell of fresh blood poured out and overwhelmed Klein's nose. From what he could see, the reclining chair in the activity room was overturned and was stained with dark red blood. A book lay beside it, its cover facing up. With just that one glance, Klein felt as if he was seeing a murder scene. The name of the book caught his eye, The Devil's Legend of Civilausborough. Devil. Klein was about to make a move when a strong wind suddenly blew in the activity room, quickly pulling the door back. Creak. Klein clearly saw the entire interior of the activity room. The charcoal in the fireplace had long since burned out, and there was no longer any red embers glowing. The coffee table, the sofa, the chairs, the cupboard, and other items had either fallen or shattered. It appeared as if he witnessed an intense battle. There was a lot of blood on the carpet and walls, and a lot of scorch marks, but there was no sign of a body at the scene, not even a stump limb. Something happened to Detective Stanton. Klein suddenly took a step back, intending to first leave the place. However, almost at the same time, he felt someone lock onto him. Someone was staring at him with a cold and merciless gaze from an unknown location. The moment he made a mistake in his response, he would immediately be met with a fatal blow. How can this be a suitable day to visit Isengard Stanton? Was my interpretation of the revelation wrong? Klein didn't dare to act rashly. However, he was neither too nervous or flustered. Having experienced many battles and performances, he knew that he needed to stay calm during such moments. Tap, tap, tap. Isengard Stanton's assistant walked over with a tray. On the tray was a tin teapot and 2 white porcelain cups. The assistant froze in place when he saw the scene in the activity room. He looked at Klein, his face suddenly filled with fear as he stuttered, "You killed Mr. Stanton." Every time he said a word, a piece of flesh fell from his face as blood gushed out. After he finished speaking, his body was torn to shreds, turning into a dismembered corpse. It was as if he had always been in that state, with everything preceding this being him in a state where he was stitched up. Clang! Crack! The tin pot and white porcelain cup hit the ground at the same time, rolling or splashing, and the tea water quickly soaked the area. Klein didn't move as he stood there watching everything that had happened. This was because he still felt like he was being watched. The person who had caused this series of events appeared to be waiting for him to make a move before leaping onto his back and snapping his neck. After an unknown period of time, in a silent and eerie stalemate, Klein saw the door to Isengard Stanton's house open up as a group of policemen in black and white checkered uniforms stormed in. When they found the nauseating and dismembered corpses on the floor, they drew their revolvers and pointed them at Klein, who stood at the doorway of the activity room. Despite facing the black muzzles of the guns, Klein relaxed. The wordless gaze that seemed to hold a gun to the back of his head disappeared at that instant. Klein raised his hands and laughed helplessly. "I won't say anything until I see my lawyer." Backlund's Chisak police station. Chained to a water pipe, Klein met lawyer Jürgen once again. "I will accompany you during the interrogation." There was nothing unusual about Jürgen's expression, as though Detective Moriarty belonged here. Klein sighed and said, "What a tragedy. I should be considering what I will be eating tonight, not talking to a stone-faced police officer." The thing he was most thankful for today was that due to the Aurora Orders investigation and the attention of the Rose School of Thought's high-sequence Beyonder, he didn't bring any Beyonder items with him. His only revolver was easily concealed from the body search using a magic-like performance. When he entered the interrogation room, he recounted the letter he received from Isengard Stanton about discussing a case without the police officer's questioning. "Later, we'll go to your house with Mr. Jürgen to retrieve these letters. I hope they're still there." The officer in charge of the interrogation switched gears and asked, "How did you get to know Detective Isengard Stanton?" Klein replied without hesitation, "Because of that serial murder case." At this point, he suddenly froze for a moment. It reminded him of something. He had always suspected that there was a master behind the devil dog, the person who had harumphed when the devil dog was killed. Yes, the book Stanton was reading before the attack was The Devil's Legend of Civilau's Burrow. Could it be that the owner of the devil dog is beginning to take revenge after lying low all this time? And Detective Stanton was the person in the police records who provided the main clues or ideas. Furthermore, he was the one who received the bounty reward. Klein quickly had a theory. When he thought about the possibility that the devil dog's owner was involved, Klein changed his strategy and decided to recount his involvement with Isengard Stanton in great detail. In addition, he took the initiative to mention Isengard Stanton's assembly of a team of detectives to investigate the serial murder and the portion of the bounty that they successfully obtained. In that commission, although I only gave some ideas, well, in the jargon of the private detective industry, I provided suggestions, but it was still considered the greatest contribution by Mr. Stanton, so I received the bulk of the bounty, Klein concluded. The two officers in charge of the interrogation jotted down the information and asked if anyone could prove it. Klein gave them the names and addresses of Stewart, Kaslana, and the other private detectives. "Very good, Mr. Moriarty. Your answer is detailed enough." A police officer stopped writing and asked, "How long did you spend in Isengard Stanton's home today? I mean, from the time you entered to the time we found you." Klein thought for a moment and, without consulting lawyer Jürgen, directly replied, "About 2 to 3 minutes." What he said was based on what he truly felt. Another police officer raised his eyebrows and said, "Many residents nearby were able to confirm that you entered Isengard Stanton's house around 2:10 p.m. We arrived at the scene at 2:28 p.m., which is to say, you were in the house for about 18 minutes, not 2 or 3 minutes. What exactly were you doing during this lengthy period of time? Why didn't you leave and call the police?" 18 minutes passed. Klein frowned suddenly. He felt that the stalemate he had with the existence which silently watched him lasted for slightly more than a minute. How did it take a full 18 minutes? Was it the strange feeling of being watched that confused my grasp of time, or was it something else? Is it the Beyonder powers of the other party? If it really was the owner of the devil dog, he would at least be at sequence 6, with a high probability of being sequence 5. While Klein pondered, Jürgen leaned forward, ready to accuse the police of being posing leading questions. That was not a very good reason, but he simply wanted to use this method to interrupt the pace of the interrogation and delay the unfavorable question for his client. At this moment, Klein raised his hand to rub his forehead. What I just said was the truth. Based on what I felt, only 2 or 3 minutes had passed after I entered Detective Isengard Stanton's house. Upon saying that, he emphasized, "Yes, based on what I felt." The two officers exchanged looks before writing the statement down. After a moment of silence, the officer who had asked the question said, "During those 18 minutes, a servant who came back from outside the house rang the doorbell, but no one answered, so he looked in through the oriel window and saw the floor full of corpses and that you were standing in the doorway of the activity room." He was terrified, running to the police station like a madman, and many passers-by in some residents had confirmed that. Klein ignored the look in lawyer Jürgen's eyes and shook his head. "I didn't hear the doorbell." The two officers exchanged looks again, but they made no comment. All they did was jot down what was said. They asked questions about other details, and Klein, who had done nothing and was free from guilt, answered every question truthfully. At the end, he couldn't help but ask, "Did you find Detective Isengard Stanton? It didn't seem like the activity room had a corpse." "He's likely to be still alive, right?" A police officer used a pen to tap on the table and said, "That's one of the things we're wondering about. Only the activity room in the house had signs of fighting, and the windows were closed, and they hadn't been opened for days. As you know, it's very normal to do so during Backlund's autumn and winter seasons. The attacker and Mr. Isengard Stanton left the room in a strange way, and we found no trace of him anywhere else in the house or in the neighborhood, not even blood." Without waiting for Klein to speak, he questioned before answering his own question, "You definitely wish to mention the activity room's door and the door to the house, but many people have confirmed that there was no pursuit nearby, nor was there anyone taken hostage or a corpse being moved away. Maybe it really happened in the middle of the night. Maybe they were able to go through walls." Klein silently offered other possibilities in his mind, and he silently prayed. May the goddess bless Detective Isengard Stanton and that he escaped the disaster. The Evernight goddess was the empress of disaster and horror. When the interrogation was over, Klein was remanded in a small room, and the police sent someone to pick up the letter as evidence with lawyer Jürgen at 15, Minsk Street. It wasn't until the evening that Klein was finally admitted bail, posting a sum of £50. It's much more expensive than the last time. It's difficult for the average private detective to produce that much cash in a short period of time. After leaving the Chisak police station, Klein pulled up the collar of his tweed coat and complained to Jürgen. Jürgen still wore a professional and staid expression. "The situation was favorable towards you the last time, but this time, much of the evidence points to you." He stopped a rental carriage, turned his head to the side, and looked at Klein. "Sherlock, I'm your lawyer. Before you answer the policeman's questions, it's best that you communicate with me, even if it's just sending me a look. Do not speak carelessly even if you feel that there are no problems. Ordinary people who haven't been trained will easily say things that trip them up. I'm used to fabricating my own stories and solving my own problems." Klein recalled what had just happened and gave a hollow laugh. "Okay, I will keep that in mind." Without another word, Jürgen boarded the carriage. Klein sat down across him and thought about Detective Isengard Stanton's attack. As he was thinking, he suddenly heard the rumbling sound of his stomach. "It's already past my normal dinner time." Klein took out his gold pocket watch and opened it. He didn't want to waste any more energy preparing food, so he began to think about which restaurant was worth looking forward to. At that moment, Jürgen raised his eyelids and said, "I've asked my grandmother to prepare dinner for 3. How can I impose on you?" Klein was startled for a moment before he laughed. Mrs. Doris's cooking skills are always something to look forward to. By the time they got back to Minsk Street in Sherwood Borough, the sky was completely dark and the street lamps were even brighter than the indistinct red moon in the sky. After having dinner at the Jürgen's house and having fun with the cat, Klein strolled back to Unit 15 in the cold, damp air. He habitually rummaged through the letterbox and pulled out a copy of the Backlund Evening News that had just arrived. Klein opened the door with the newspaper in hand, and just as he put the cane away, he realized something was wrong. His spiritual intuition as a seer told him that a stranger had entered his house. Was it the police who came to collect the evidence? Klein looked around warily and suddenly saw a letter on the coffee table. There should have only been newspapers sitting there. Klein entered the living room warily, in preparation for an attack. He moved closer to the coffee table, and during the entire process, the surroundings were completely silent without the slightest abnormality. Glancing down at the letter, Klein first took out a pair of black gloves and wore them before opening the letter. There was a thin piece of paper inside the envelope. After unfolding it, a dark red color was immediately reflected in Klein's eyes, and the faint smell of blood lingered around his nose. Words were written on the piece of paper with coagulated blood: "All of you will die." This. Is it really the owner of the devil dog? Is he taking revenge on the people who caused his subordinate's death? This is truly a case of bullying the weak and fearing the strong. Why not directly find the Nighthawks responsible for the cleanup operation? Klein's heart tightened, and many thoughts flashed through his mind. But he quickly dismissed his complaint. It was very normal to exact vengeance on the person that one could handle. Just like his past few months in Backlund, he had never thought of finding in Sanguil, but he never gave up his pursuit of Lenivus. After looking around again, Klein gradually found that this matter was a little confusing. Isn't he afraid of being caught by the official Beyonders by using such an ostentatious method to exact revenge? Is this the acting requirement for his potion? Or, rather, because Detective Isengard Stanton escaped, he knows that he can't get rid of his targets in secret, so he can only switch his methods. But what's the reason behind this method? Also, when I was at Detective Stanton's house, he was clearly watching me. Why didn't he make a move? Was he apprehensive towards an ordinary private detective like me? No, impossible. Does he know that I'm a Beyonder? Possible. Due to the side effect of me getting lost due to the master key, I had met with the devil dog. It saw my body and how I looked like. Although I was disguised, I can't be certain that a devil can see through it. Perhaps, after that incident, it was able to present the scene to its owner in some way. However, at that time, I couldn't even defeat the devil dog, so I could only run away pathetically. What is there to be afraid of? Unless he's worried about something else, such as the injured Isengard Stanton who might be hiding nearby. Did he write to me very openly, thinking that I, a wild Beyonder, wouldn't dare to seek help from the officials? With his head filled with questions, Klein inspected the house and walked all the way to the second floor. When he opened the bedroom door, another letter came into view. The letter lay quietly on the desk, as though it had been waiting for him for a very long time. Klein opened the letter and saw a line of dark red words that were drawn: "You're next." Next. How arrogant. Klein couldn't help but sigh. At this moment, he suddenly had a thought. He raised his head and looked outside the window. Across him were a few two-story houses with their lights on. The glow of the street lamps fell on their outer walls, forming a crisscrossing zone. All of a sudden, the shadows in the area squirmed and twisted, forming a black shadow in a tailcoat. The shadow raised its right hand, gesturing in the shape of a gun, and pointed it at Klein. Then, it retracted its arm and blew at the gun's muzzle. Immediately after, it silently fell back, transforming into countless disconnected shadows. Chapter 413 Inside the Rice police station, which was in charge of Minsk Street and the surrounding district. Klein shook hands with the officer who escorted him out. This threatening letter must have had something to do with the previous serial murders. The organizer of the detective team, the great detective, Mr. Isengard Stanton, has already been attacked this afternoon. Please take it seriously. The police officer retracted his hand and said, "Don't worry, Mr. Moriarty. We definitely won't ignore your suggestion and immediately report it to the higher-ups." Thank you so much. Klein put on his hat and walked out the door. After seeing the two threatening letters and the provocation from the suspected devil dog's master, Klein didn't hesitate to bring the evidence to the nearest police station to report the case. He secretly hoped that the matter would be transferred to the mandated punishers or the machinery hive mind team as quickly as possible so that he could be placed under the protection of official Beyonders. Although he no longer had any reason to keep his identity as a detective, being fully capable of giving up his residence at 15, Minsk Street and switching to another residence and identity, he suspected that this might have been the purpose of the author of that threatening letter. Using the fear of wild beyonders being exposed, the perpetrator was forcing him to flee under the cover of the night. Then, during this process, he could seize the opportunity to launch an attack. Actually, it's quite a suitable time to attack me while I was heading over to the police station to report the incident. It's the same as when I was at home. That fellow has other plans. Confused and wary, Klein returned to Minsk Street. As soon as he got out of the carriage, he saw a figure loitering in front of his house with the help of the street lamps amid the drizzle. Klein's heart skipped a beat, but he immediately relaxed as he recognized the visitor. It was Stuart, a slim private detective with a medium build, who adored him. I can't be careless. What if the subsequent sequences of Devil has a power similar to Faceless? Klein gripped his cane tight and slowly approached, then he gave a probing shout. Detective Stuart abruptly turned his head and nervously said, Mr. Moriarty, I received a threatening letter. It said, all of you will die. You received it as well? Klein blurted out in surprise while also finding it understandable. Stuart was also one of the detectives that Isengard Stanton had gathered for the investigation of the serial murders. Stuart's eyes widened abruptly. You received it too? Yes. Klein nodded seriously. More than one actually, he added silently. What should I do? I first went to visit Mr. Stanton, but I heard that he was attacked, so I immediately came to you. Oh, thank God for his blessings. I was about to leave. Stuart blurted out. Klein pointed to the door. Let's talk inside. After entering the living room, Klein excused himself to the bathroom and hurriedly went above the grey fog to perform 2 divinations. First, it was to confirm that the person was Stuart. And second, if there was any relatively serious danger that night. He received a revelation confirming both. In other words, Stuart wasn't the enemy in disguise, and it would be a night of considerable danger. Of course, that danger might not happen right in front of Klein, but someone might be wiped out in secret. That was the limitation of divination. All he could receive was a revelation of a certain degree, not the entire answer. He was unable to get a precise answer. Furthermore, the limitations in mysticism couldn't be solved by techniques such as exclusion or dichotomy. Returning to the real world, Klein pressed the mechanical button of the toilet bowl, and in the midst of the splashing water, he washed his hands and opened the door. Stuart, would you like coffee or tea? Klein asked in a completely composed manner. Stuart stood up and shook his head. No, we should discuss the problem first. Although I've received many threatening letters in the past, none of them can be compared to what I received today. He must have written them using fresh blood. My intuition tells me that he'll definitely take action, and that he has the ability to do so. By the way, Mr. Stanton was attacked by that same person, wasn't he? I think so, Klein said stoically before sitting down. This likely has something to do with the previous serial murders. The common thing that you, me, and Mr. Stanton share in common is that case. Stuart's reaction is a little too extreme. Is he spooked out by the attack on Mr. Stanton? At the same time, Klein was carefully observing Stuart. Being infected by his attitude, Stuart calmed down significantly. He sat down again and said while deep in thought, it seems to be the case. Before he could finish his sentence, tinkling sounds suddenly echoed in the room. Someone had rung the doorbell. Stuart instantly jolted, like a frightened bird. Klein frowned as he looked at him before getting up to head for the door. As soon as he touched the handle, the scene outside appeared in his mind. The visitors were Detective Kaslana in her grey tweed coat, her red-haired assistant, Lydia, and several other men who looked familiar. They're all the private detectives who Mr. Stanton had assembled. As expected. As Klein recalled, he recognized the visitors. He pulled open the door and took 2 steps back. With bushy eyebrows and slightly drooping cheeks, Kislana looked at Klein and Stuart, who was behind him. Without exchanging pleasantries, she bluntly said, "We've all received the same threatening letter, so I believe you guys did too, right?" "Yes," Klein replied solemnly. Kislana didn't shy away from exhaling a breath of white mist. "We were all assembled by Mr. Stanton to participate in the investigation of the serial murders. That's the only thing we have in common." "I think so too." Klein pointed inside his house. "Let's talk inside." Watching the 6 private detectives enter, Klein quickly analyzed the intentions of the Devil Dog's master. To stir up such a huge commotion, this will soon attract the attention of the official Beyonder organizations. Who knows, there might be a demigod powerhouse guarding this area, so how would he take his revenge? He's just being provocative, making the military in the Beyonders from the 3 churches send people to protect all these private detectives. With the official Beyonders not daring to be negligent, it will scatter personnel and exhaust them by making them run around. Is all this to take revenge on the main target of the attack from back then? In the process, he might even have a chance to kill some of the official Beyonders. As for the private investigators, he will only take action much later, once their wariness has relaxed. Of course, if probes such as this give an opening, then he definitely wouldn't let it go. To devils who can sense danger ahead of time, this is a method that plays on their strengths. However, the 3 churches, together with the military and the royal family, have many experts and sealed artifacts. They have no lack of demigods or grade 0 and grade 1 sealed artifacts. Is the master of the Devil Dog so certain that there are no powers or items that can restrain this strength of his? No, he definitely wouldn't dare. The official powers, especially the Nighthawks, mandated Punishers, and Machinery Hive Mind, have been fighting devils for who knows how many years. In the 4th epoch, even in the more ancient 3rd epoch, there was no lack of similar deeds. The master of the Devil Dog is at most a sequence 5. As long as anything goes wrong, to the point of nothing going wrong, he can be torn apart by a demigod or a terrifying sealed artifact. Why would he still dare to make such attempts? Or it could be said that he's simply toying with the officials and that he wouldn't act, doing it time and time again. Yes, there's another possibility. Using the threatening letter, he's able to get more than half the targets gathered together. Then, using the official Beyonder organizations' counterbalancing of each other and the procedural and bureaucratic tendencies, create a time delay. The attack on Mr. Isengard Stanton must have been handed over to the Machinery Hive Mind, who is in charge of supernatural affairs in Hillston Borough, but the ones who killed the Devil Dog were mainly comprised of the Nighthawks. The 2 organizations definitely don't communicate in detail too much. Well, it can also be assigned based on Mr. Stanton's faith. Which deity does he believe in? I don't seem to know, nor can I tell. In short, with so many private investigators living in different districts and with different faiths, the division of jurisdiction is a troublesome matter, and joint operations aren't so easy to achieve. At this moment, the ones protecting us should only be 2 or 3 groups of official Beyonders. At the very most, they would be at the level of deacons, and they wouldn't use sealed artifacts which are too powerful or dangerous. Even a demigod high-sequence Beyonder wouldn't direct their gaze over to us that quickly. This would give the Devil Dog's master a chance. Although 3 to 4 groups of official Beyonders can definitely kill 1 or even more than 1 sequence 5, as long as he takes advantage of the situation, there's a good chance that he can successfully escape. Klein was able to deduce 2 or 3 possibilities in just 20 to 30 seconds, and giving each of them a preliminary opinion. Thinking of the divination outcome that indicated that there would be significant danger tonight, Klein thoughtfully nodded his head, closed the door, and entered the living room. He said to the sitting or standing detectives, "Have you called the police?" There are almost half of the people, who were assembled back then, gathered here. He surveyed the detectives and muttered inwardly. Representing the rest, Kaslana replied, some have called the police, while others have tried to find Mr. Stanton or familiar friends. Finally, all of us got together and discussed about visiting you, the great detective. Klein gently nodded and deliberately said, everyone, don't be too nervous. The person who sent the letter should be trying to get revenge for that serial murder, but he's only one person, with at most 1 or 2 companions. As for us, we have a total of 8 detectives, all skilled in combat and shooting, so why should we be afraid of him? Besides, we were not the only ones assembled by Mr. Stanton, and it must be the same for those who received the threatening letters. They just didn't end up meeting you or come to visit me. Upon hearing his words, Kaslana and her assistant, Lydia, revealed doubtful expressions, as if they were unsure of something. Another detective took a deep breath. Mr. Moriarty, perhaps it's as you say, we need not be afraid of him. But he's a sinister snake lurking in the dark. No one knows when he will launch an attack, and no one can guard against it in advance. Furthermore, he might even harm our family members. Family members? Oh, my wife. No, my little angel. The detectives were instantly overwhelmed by their emotions as they exhibited exaggerated reactions. Standing behind Klein, Stuart was trembling with fear and anger. No, I don't want that, he murmured, almost losing control of his emotions. Just as Klein and Kaslana attempted to calm them down, Stuart suddenly drew his gun and aimed it at the back of Klein's head. His eyes were glazed over, and his emotions seemed to have completely overwhelmed him. Chapter 4:14. While Stuart was raising his gun to aim, Klein, who had long been on guard, had already detected it. He lunged forward at the same time as Stuart performed his series of actions. Bang! Stuart, who was clearly out of control, pulled the trigger, and the bullet grazed the side of a private detective's face as it hit the wall. Instantly, the other detectives pulled out their revolvers as a result of the stress. It was as if they were looking at the enemy, turning the scene extremely chaotic. Among them, Stuart and a private detective had flushed faces and bulging veins. Their eyes burned with a mixture of fear and anger, as though they had turned into so-called devils. At this moment, Kaslana bellowed, "Stop!" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was filled with awe. It made everyone's body tremble, and they subconsciously complied. Although there was a brief moment of silence, everyone's mood didn't seem to improve. Klein had already rolled over to the other side and stood up with his revolver in his hand. His mind raced, and he couldn't afford to hide his thoughts. He planned to rely on his hallucination ability to calm down the few visitors. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Ding dong, ding dong. A few of the private detectives suddenly became alert, and their eyes revealed a hint of lucidity. The tinkling of the doorbell was like a bucket of cold water that poured over their heads. Stuart looked at the revolver in his hand and mumbled in a daze, "What was I doing just now? The official Beyonders have made their move." Klein breathed a sigh of relief, approaching the door as he held his revolver. The moment he held the handle, the image of the person outside appeared in his mind. It was a man in a black coat and a hunter's hat. He had gray temples, and a thin face, Isengard Stanton. The detective's face was somewhat pale, and his left arm was propped up near the shoulder. "He really is all right." Klein was delighted at first, but then he became cautious. He remembered the day when Nimblewright Master Rosago had transformed into a constable to knock at his door. Klein placed his finger on the trigger, pulled the door open, and took 2 steps back. Isengard Stanton smiled and nodded at him. "Thank you for your visit this afternoon, otherwise, I might not have been able to continue playing hide-and-seek with that devil. You saved my life." This. Could it be that the correct interpretation of "a suitable date for visiting Isengard Stanton" is that by visiting him this afternoon, I was able to help him out of trouble? What about the next few days of "suitable dates for visiting"? By skirting around the murder scene, I wouldn't be suspected. Klein didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't let his guard down as he made way. What exactly happened? We'll talk later. Isengard suddenly lowered his voice and laughed. Do you wish to discuss the subject of Beyonders in front of Stuart and the others? So here you are mentioning Beyonders to me so naturally. That's right, I was able to remain in a deadlock with the master of the devil dog for more than 10 minutes. That serves to prove that I'm no ordinary person. Besides, the suggestion I previously offered pointed straight at a devil-turned animal. Klein quietly stayed behind Isengard Stanton by 2 steps. Upon seeing this great detective, Kaslana and her assistant, Lydia, let out a sigh of relief. Stuart and the other private detectives also showed a look of relief. Are you all right, Mr. Stanton? They asked. Isengard slightly moved his left arm and said, a little injured, but not too badly. Okay. Everyone, don't be nervous. This will be over soon. The police are waiting for that bastard in the darkness nearby. Is it because of the serial murders? Have you locked onto the suspect? Will he hurt the innocent? The private detectives asked frantically. Isengard pressed his right palm down. Don't worry, I'll tell you in detail in the time to come, but before that, I need to find out a few things from Sherlock and Kaslana. We'll head to the activity room for a few minutes. His accumulated prestige made the detectives sit down without rebutting. Although they were still worried, they no longer had the problem of fretting or suddenly losing control of their emotions. After entering the activity room and closing the wooden door, Klein took a look at the enclosed room and suddenly thought of something. This kind of environment is very suitable for using items like the biological poison bottle. Ahem. Klein cleared his throat, walked across the room, and opened the window. He still didn't relax his wariness against Isengard Stanton, nor did he believe that Kaslana was absolutely trustworthy. Isengard looked around, directly taking Klein's reclining chair before chuckling. Being old, I still like to sit like this. Sitting on a single sofa, Klein asked again, Mr. Stanton, what exactly happened? Isengard looked at Kaslana, who was standing behind a coffee table, and said, we're all Beyonders, so I won't explain stuff pertaining to general knowledge. Beyonders? Kaslana first looked at Klein, then at Isengard, slightly surprised but not all that shocked. So it turns out that you're also a Beyonder. Why were you stumped by a weak ghost back then and unable to even discover the problem? Yes, perhaps she's from a sequence that isn't good at dealing with shadows or wraiths. Klein responded to her gaze. Isengard smiled and said, I once went to the Lenberg for 4 years of studies, where I came into contact with the Beyonder world and became a believer of the god of knowledge and wisdom. After returning to Backlund, I gradually established a good relationship with the military, the Church of the Evernight Goddess, and the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, but I didn't dare to reveal my true identity, because the mandated punishers would definitely eliminate me as a cult's heretic. On this matter, the other official organizations wouldn't help me directly, because that would be equivalent to starting a war with the Church of the Lord of Storms. As expected of the Tyrant's Church. Tyrant? Klein asked in passing. Isengard took out his pipe, but only sniffed the tobacco. This is what our church internally calls the Lord of the Storms. All right. Let me first return to what happened today. The person who attacked me and delivered threatening letters to you is the master of the serial murderer from before. Heh, you should know that the murderer is a black dog of the devil sequence, especially Sherlock. You were the first to point out that the devil might be an animal. Klein smiled, neither denying nor admitting it. Kaslana also just clasped her hands together, not saying a word. Isengard shook his head and laughed. Don't worry, I'm not an enforcer, but as a believer of the God of knowledge and wisdom, I can't preach in Backlund or officially establish an organization. I can only rely on you and others like you for help. In other words, you can help us take the blame. Klein mocked inwardly. Isengard continued, seeing that they were still not making any admission. The Devil Dog's master is a Sequence 5 expert. Yes, according to what I know, the Devil Pathways Sequence 5 is Desire Apostle. They can use and control everyone's emotions and desires, enticing them to be corrupted. When facing a Desire Apostle, one mustn't have feelings that are too intense. One mustn't make or exhibit overt desires, otherwise, they'll immediately be remotely controlled by him. Otherwise, a seed might be planted in them or have it catalyze immediately. This will make people exhibit many problems as they gradually become corrupted. They might also lose control of their emotions at a critical moment and be unable to put up any resistance. This is a portion of the beyonder powers a Desire Apostle has. I have confirmed these aspects from my battle with him. Upon hearing this, Klein suddenly understood one of the reasons why the culprit had sent out threatening letters and made such provocative actions. He wanted to anger us, making our emotions experience violent changes so that he could bury a corruption seed or catalyze our emotions, making it erupt out of control. This would make his follow-up attacks simpler and easier. Fortunately, I'm a beyonder who has experienced many things. At that time, all I had was vigilance and caution. When Stuart and the others saw the threatening letter, their emotions clearly changed, so the Desire Apostle had planted a seed in them. If we hadn't been able to stabilize them in time, the situation would have become chaotic with the internal strife, giving the surrounding official beyonders little time to react and thus, giving the Desire Apostle ample opportunity. Back when I was in Isengard Stanton's house, I felt that time moved slowly. Was it a result of the magnification of my sudden increase in vigilance, tension, wariness, and other emotions? Klein thought back and felt lucky. So that's how it is, Kaslana seemed to gain an understanding of many things. Isengard rubbed his temples and said, I was almost manipulated by him, which resulted in my injuries. Afterward, I used a mystical item to play hide and seek in the house. It was only when Sherlock visited and the three sides came to a stalemate did I get a chance to have a breather. My poor assistant was looking forward to returning to Lenberg for Mass on New Year's Day. At this point, he sighed. When the police arrived, I took the opportunity to escape and then used the river to escape the pursuit, Isengard added. He then asked, Sherlock, Kaslana, how do you plan on handling this issue? After a moment of silence, Kaslana said, Mr. Stanton, do you have any suggestions? Isengard said, first, take the protection of the official beyonders, preventing the Desire Apostle from daring to take action. While this is happening, we should hope that he's quickly caught or killed. If our hopes aren't met, it's impossible that the official beyonders would allocate people to constantly protect us. Then, we only have two choices. First, it's to change our identity, including our families, and move to a different place with their help. However, no one can guarantee that the Desire Apostle won't discover this. Second, we can directly join a corresponding official organization and become an external member. That way, our identity and place of residence will change as well, but it's much safer. Join a corresponding official organization. The machinery hive mind. Or go to places like Lenberg or Mason to join the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Wouldn't I then come to have three last names? No, a believer of three churches. Klein felt an inexplicable sense of absurdity. He thoughtfully asked for advice, are there no other solutions? At the same time, there was no change in Kaslana's expression. It was unknown what she was thinking. Isengard Stanton rubbed his pipe and said, yes, that is that we join forces to create an opportunity so that we can quickly find and detain the Desire Apostle. Of course, the perfect outcome would be us killing him directly. Chapter 415 Klein didn't have too big of a response in regards to Isengard Stanton's suggestion. He looked at the tightly closed door of the activity room and said, as far as I know, a devil can predict danger before we take action, and they can even determine the source of the danger, thus providing an effective response. It's hard to find and restrain him. Isengard nodded slightly and said, yes, that's indeed the case, but this doesn't mean that there are no solutions. What solutions? Kaslana immediately asked. Isengard smiled and said, I fought him head-on and witnessed his beyonder powers of predicting danger, so I have a rough idea of its strengths and weaknesses. A devil can indeed detect danger before it happens, and it can be done so for quite a significant period of time prior to the danger. As long as we make any plans and take decisive action that targets him, he would receive the corresponding premonition. Of course, it has to be something that can really harm him. No, the truth is that the strengths and weaknesses of different types of devils are different. Some of them might only be capable of detecting danger 10 to 20 minutes in advance. Klein silently retorted, but he didn't say it out loud. Isengard continued, the flaw of premonition powers is that it can only detect the person and location of the danger, but it doesn't know the specific details. This gives us an opportunity to take advantage of it. What opportunity? I don't think we can trap a devil that can predict danger, Kaslana asked incredulously. Klein also nodded in agreement. Of course, I can use the grey fog to deceive the Desire Apostle, making him unable to detect danger ahead of time. But the problem is, how can I expose the secret of the grey fog in front of others? Klein silently added a few words. Isengard chuckled. It's true that it won't work normally, but the Beyonder world is full of incredible things. I'm a Sequence 7 knowledge keeper of the Reader Pathway, also known as Detective. By honestly telling you this, it's a way of showing my sincerity in cooperating. In this situation, I think honesty is more important than anything else. Only Sequence 7. How could a Sequence 7 escape from a Desire Apostle? It seems like Mr. Stanton has a powerful mystical item. Enlightened, Klein shifted in his seat. Does a knowledge keeper have the ability to suppress a devil's premonition powers? Kaslana asked with her body leaning forward. No, Isengard said with a laugh. However, I have a ring. It originates from a Sequence 6 rampager of the Reader Pathway. It allows me to differentiate, recognize, remember, and mimic all the Beyonder powers I've seen before. Of course, against more powerful Beyonder powers, the chance of failure is higher. There is a maxim in our church, omniscience means omnipotence. Why does it sound so familiar? Furthermore, the description of the item. Klein was about to run through his memories when he saw Isengard Stanton take out a gorgeous ring. The ring was inlaid with many small diamonds. Together, they surrounded a beautiful emerald green gem that looked like a human eye. Just by looking at this ring, Klein felt dizzy, as if he had overworked his mind. Isn't this sealed artifact 2-081? Isengard Stanton is old Mr. Eye of Wisdom. Klein looked up in surprise at the detective sitting in the reclining chair. That ring was the sealed artifact 2-081 which Eye of Wisdom had flaunted to him previously and had used several times in the Beyonder gathering. Eye of Wisdom. This code name does sound like it's related to the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Klein, using his clown's ability to control his expression as he looked quietly at Isengard Stanton. In the end, he found that some of the outlines of the great detective did match Eye of Wisdom, but there were many details which were highly different. His ability to disguise himself is very impressive. Was it done with the help of 2-081? Klein made a rough judgment. At this moment, he suddenly thought of a scene. If Mr. Stanton says, let all of us work together to resist the Desire Apostle, and the most important thing is honesty. I have already described my sequence and mystical item. It's your turn. What should I say? Silently take out the sun brooch which he sold to me. At that moment, wouldn't he be going, nice, so it's you, punk. While Klein was imagining things, Kaslana looked at the ring Isengard Stanton showed and asked in envy and puzzlement, what power are you planning on mimicking to resist the Desire Apostle's ability to predict danger? Isengard curled the corner of his lips and chuckled. The premonition that devils have towards danger. At that moment, he looked like a hoary fox. Ah! That actually works. Klein was instantly momentarily unable to figure out the intricacies. Seeing Kaslana and Klein puzzled, Isengard laughed and explained, "First, which is what we're currently doing, draw up a plan that can actually harm the Desire Apostle and begin working on it. Second, the Desire Apostle will sense the danger and know that the danger comes from us and that it stems from this place. Third, as a devil, without any advanced preparations, there are certain things that are instinctual to him that he cannot change. His first reaction is definitely to kill us or to exact revenge on us, and there will be certain changes to his body, after which he will consider whether the current situation is suitable for a counterattack or not, and whether he should choose to stay away from us. Fourth, by mimicking the devil's premonition powers, I'll sense the threat of the Desire Apostle and grasp the source of danger, which is also his present location. That's some godly operation." Klein was quite surprised. But what happens next? The Desire Apostle would run away as soon as he realizes that something is wrong. We won't even have time to chase after him. Doubts immediately arose in him. Isengard looked at the two of them and smiled. According to my deductions, he must be hiding in our surroundings right now. No matter how good he is at remotely controlling the emotions of others, there must be a distance limit. And just now, he had led Stuart and the others to lose control of their emotions. After I escaped his pursuit, the reason why it took me so long to appear here was because I was discussing a plan with the Nighthawks, Machinery Hive Mind, and the military. They will each send 2 to 3 squads who are in charge of monitoring the nearby districts. These districts all have their code names. This will all be within the Desire Apostle's expectations. Even if he senses the danger, he will only treat it as normal. As soon as I confirm his location, I will inform the official Beyonders, and they will rapidly seal off the corresponding areas and close in on him. But herein lies the problem. How are we to inform the official Beyonders? If we're unable to accomplish this within seconds, the Desire Apostle will escape. Of course, he might have fled when what he just did had failed, Klein said, in thought. If that's the case, we would be out of solutions as well. There's no plan that's absolutely perfect. We can only wait for a particular sealed artifact's activation process to complete. When the time comes, the Desire Apostle might have already left Backland, but he might return at any time, Isengard explained. He then took out a golden palm-sized item. It looked like a miniature telegraph, but it also had a trumpet on it. This is a sealed artifact. It can allow my voice to sound out simultaneously up to a range of 5 kilometers, Isengard smiled as he introduced it. Its negative effect is that once it's activated, all sounds within 5 kilometers will be transmitted to the user's ears for an extended period of time. Of course, I can mimic a Beyonder power to mitigate this effect. After listening carefully, Kaslana frowned slightly. Since there are official Beyonders involved, there doesn't seem to be any need for our cooperation. Isengard carefully put on sealed artifact 2-081 and earnestly said, in order to not alarm the Desire Apostle ahead of time, there's a void of power in the nearby district. If the target is really here, the 3 of us need to help each other to retain him as best as we can. I have no problem. Klein pondered for a moment before agreeing. Kaslana also nodded and said, Mr. Stanton, there's no need for you to explain so much. After all, we'll cooperate for our own sake. An explanation is part of the plan, and an agreement means that the operation is about to begin. Isengard half closed his eyes. The emerald green gem on the ring of his right hand began to glow with a dark blue light. Suddenly, Isengard Stanton stood up, pointing upwards with a grim expression. He's right here, upstairs. Klein and Kaslana stood up at the same time, one ready to snap a finger and light a match on the second floor to jump up there directly, while the other followed Isengard towards the door. None of them expected the Desire Apostle to be so bold as to remain in the vicinity after the failure of the previous machination, right in 15, Minsk Street. Maybe he was upstairs watching it all with a cold gaze while we were discussing the plan to deal with him. This thought suddenly popped up in Klein's mind. At that moment, he saw Kaslana's eyes suddenly turn red, and her right hand formed a fist as she punched out at Isengard Stanton's back where his heart was. This. Klein's pupils contracted as he instantly came to a realization of many things. The reason why the Desire Apostle didn't flee was because he still had other plans set up. He still had a seed of corruption in someone's heart that he didn't catalyze. That person was none other than Kislana. One of the only 3 Beyonders here. The reason why the unsuccessful attempt at instigating them was so easily resolved was to let their guard down and wait for the critical moment to make Kislana lose control of her emotions. The Desire Apostle's biggest target was still Isengard Stanton. How crafty. Klein snapped his fingers, but it was only an air bullet that was fired at Kislana. At the same time, he shouted, "Be careful." Isengard had a lot of experience too. He didn't care what the situation was as he threw himself forward. However, Kislana ignored the bullet, allowing it to strike her arm and allowing blood to splatter everywhere. Bam! She punched Isengard in the back, throwing her entire body forward. Gotcha! Klein heard the sound of bones breaking, and the point of contact was the spine. Chapter 4:16, Two Rights Make a Wrong Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Gotcha. When Klein saw Isengard Stanton's back cave in, even he felt a faint pain in his spine. Isengard fell to the ground with a thud, seemingly instantly losing consciousness from the pain. Kislana, on the other hand, stood in her original spot, gasping for breath with a blank look in her eyes. Her forehead was covered in cold sweat, and there was no follow-up attack. It was as if she had just awoken from a long nightmare caused by her emotions. All the strength in her body had completely disappeared from her previous outburst. Huff. Puff. Kislana's body swayed, on the brink of collapsing. Klein's eyes narrowed as he rushed up to Isengard Stanton in 2 steps. He kneeled and tried to help him up. Isengard, who was sprawled on the ground, cried out in pain, "Run. Don't worry about me." Obviously, he didn't think that a 3-person group which instantly had one heavily injured member and another losing all her strength could retain the Desire Apostle. Thus, he told Klein to immediately escape and meet up with the official Beyonders, otherwise, all 3 of them would die there and then. At the same time, Isengard raised his right hand with difficulty, attempting to use some of his Beyonder powers so as to attract the attention of the official Beyonders who were quite a distance away. As for the tiny telegraph with the trumpet, it had long since flown to the wall because of Isengard's fall. Klein showed hesitation, and just as he was about to make a decision, he saw a thick black liquid flowing down from the ceiling, quickly forming a pitch-black figure. The figure seemed to be completely wrapped in a black curtain, only exposing a pair of cold blue eyes. At the sight of him, Klein felt as if he was seeing the most intense emotions and desires of a living creature: fear, wrath, greed, jealousy, hunger, lust, etc. The Desire Apostle didn't waste the situation he painstakingly created, and he entered the activity room almost immediately. At this moment, out of the 3-person team of detectives, Kislana was exhausted from the outburst of emotions, while Isengard Stanton's spine was severely injured, causing him to lose his ability to partake in combat. Only Klein was left unscathed. However, other than his revolver and Beyonder bullets, all of his mystical items were above the grey fog. Besides, he was facing a Sequence 5 Desire Apostle, a powerhouse capable of nurturing a devil dog. At that moment, the corners of Klein's lips curled up slightly. His right hand, which had been placed on the wound on Isengard's back, abruptly swiped, causing the obvious depression to shift to the side and onto a rib. The magician's most miraculous Beyonder power, damage transfer. It allowed a wound to be transferred once on a body, turning a serious injury into a minor injury, but it was unable to transfer the damage to other people or items. When Klein saw that Isengard Stanton was injured, he had already thought of the subsequent countermeasures. By first acting as if they were out of solutions to make the Desire Apostle appear, and then transfer the great detective's wound to leave him with only a slight fracture in his ribs, Klein believed that Isengard would then be able to deal with the Desire Apostle with him. It was a struggle for survival that all humans on instinct. In this way, even if the Desire Apostle realized that something was amiss, it would be too late for him to escape. Once Klein completed the treatment and joined forces with the great detective, they would be able to stall the target until the official Beyonders arrived. Almost at the same time, the ring that Isengard had pointed outwards began to produce greenness that was filled with vitality. A faint glow soon enveloped Isengard's body, allowing his wounds to quickly heal. The fracture on his ribs was instantly healed. The great detective's pain was real, but his helplessness was just an act. However, this overlapped with Klein's help. When the Desire Apostle who was about to take action saw this scene, his eyes suddenly widened, and his body stopped abruptly. Being free from any ensnarement, he turned around and ran towards the window. During this process, his body quickly collapsed into a sticky black liquid. The liquid seeped into the ground, penetrated the wall, and disappeared. Klein raised his right hand just in time to snap his fingers. The air bullet went through the open window and shot outside, sending sparks flying everywhere. However, the Desire Apostle had completely disappeared. He ran really fast, without any hesitation at all. Are you a devil or not? This will only make things worse in the future. The corner of Klein's mouth twitched as he turned to look at Isengard Stanton, who had rolled around and stood up. The great detective happened to look at him. You're capable of healing wounds. You're capable of healing wounds. The two of them opened their mouths at the same time and asked the same question. After looking at each other, Isengard shook his head and smiled bitterly. I never expected that the trap I set would allow him to escape. As he spoke, his ring began to glow, and he looked around to confirm that the Desire Apostle had already left. Isengard then gave a brief explanation. I didn't have the chance to mimic the healing ability this afternoon. Later, I believed that I could use this to set a trap and make the Desire Apostle appear by making him think that I'm injured. Therefore, I deliberately bundled my wound in an exaggerated manner. He pointed to the cushion that elevated his left arm to his shoulder. Sure enough, it worked. But I didn't expect you to be able to deal with serious injuries, Anne. Isengard sighed softly. As a result, both of them putting healing the injuries as their top priority. No one held back the Desire Apostle, so the moment he realized that something was wrong, he immediately fled. Both Stanton and I had trump cards that the Desire Apostle didn't know about, and we wanted to use that to trick him. Who knew that we would cancel each other out and allow him to flee? Is this the so-called two rights make a wrong? Klein helplessly laughed. This is because we don't know each other well enough, and we didn't have good teamwork. No, it's my fault, Isengard said sincerely. When I saw that you didn't run away or defend yourself, and instead came over to help me, I should have deduced that you weren't flustered, that you had the confidence and means, but unfortunately while wearing this ring, my brain remained in a highly taxed state. I wasn't able to consider anything else. So sealed artifact 2-081 will passively reduce one's intelligence. Klein smiled and said, Mr. Stanton, it's not the time to discuss who's responsible. The Desire Apostle has already fled. We should consider our subsequent actions. Isengard took off his ring and turned to the door of the activity room. The official Beyonders are arriving soon. I'll go outside to calm Stuart and the others. After that, we can come up with a plan. Are you joining me, or do you plan on handling some of your matters? The official Beyonders. Mr. Stanton previously mentioned the Nighthawks, the machinery hive mind, and the military. Please don't be an acquaintance. Yes, my spiritual intuition hasn't warned me, so it's probably not. Mr. Stanton is giving me a chance to clean up and dispose of any sensitive items so that I don't get into trouble with the unfriendly official Beyonders. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind as he asked, Mr. Stanton, when you grasped the Desire Apostle's location, where was he? Isengard thought and said, your bedroom. He was sitting in front of your desk. How arrogant. Klein pointed out the door and said, I'll head over there to investigate. I'll see if he left behind any traces. If we can figure out what the Desire Apostle truly looks like, it'll definitely make apprehending him much simpler. I'll leave the rest to you. All right. Isengard moved to the side and helped up the weak Kaslana. Seeing this, Klein suddenly found it amusing. Having discussed so much and made preparations to set up a trap, we still failed to retain the Desire Apostle and ended up in this state. There are always more accidents than preparations. That's why Magician is just a sequence 7. After leaving the room, Klein went straight to the second floor and entered his bedroom. The arrangement inside remained unchanged, and even the distance between the chair and desk was no different from before. However, Klein seemed to see a figure wrapped in a pitch-black liquid. He sat there, looking straight ahead, waiting patiently and calmly for a chance. As expected of a cold-blooded. Klein looked at the glass panes of the oriel window and felt that he could divine if it had reflected something. The devil pathway is good at crime, so it wouldn't be so easy for him to leave clues behind. However, I can try going above the gray fog to give it a try. Klein inspected the area and began to burn some of the mysticism notebooks he wrote in passing. Not long after he finished dealing with the items, he saw a few strangers coming up to the second floor. The leader of the group was a man with a stiff face but a head of frizzled, messy, and stubborn brown hair. In his hand was an ancient silver mirror with strange patterns. On both sides of the mirror there were black gems which were decorated as eyes. Hello, Mr. Moriarty. I am Icancer Bernard of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. Can I inspect this place? Klein immediately nodded and said, no problem. He then politely said, do you need me to follow you and answer any of the questions you might have? All right. Sorry for the trouble. Mr. Stanton has mentioned to me about your situation, Icancer said with a smile. Several of his team members followed behind him. They treated him differently, some ignoring him, some curious, some filled with hostility. My situation? How exactly did Mr. Stanton introduce me and what story did he make up? As his thoughts raced, Klein followed Icancer into the bedroom again, while the rest of the official Beyonders paired up, each responsible for a different zone on the second floor. This is where the Desire Apostle sat. Icancer pointed at the chair in front of the desk. He had clearly asked Isengard Stanton. Yes, Klein answered frankly. Without another word, Icancer raised the silver mirror and stroked its surface 3 times with his right hand. After a short pause, he said in a deep voice, Honorable Erodes, my question is, what did the devil who was previously sitting here look like? The lights around them suddenly turned dark, as if enshrouded by mist after a rainstorm. A strange aqueous glint appeared on the surface of the silver mirror, forming a scene. A man covered in a sticky black liquid sat on a chair with his back to the window while he faced the bed. Immediately after, the scene changed. The mirror in the corner vaguely reflected the dark shadow's side profile which was similarly covered by the pitch blackness. But he could vaguely make out an outline. The Desire Apostle had very high cheekbones and a pair of cold-looking blue eyes. Chapter 417 417 Seeing the scene in the silver mirror, Klein revealed a pensive expression. This mirror is very powerful, and it even has its own name. It seems to be a living sealed artifact. Such items might not be too harmful, but the difficulty of sealing it is very high. It's seldom used except for special situations. This person named Icancer Bernard from the Machinery Hive Mind seems to be highly ranked. He should be a deacon, and definitely not a simple one at that. Divination is limited, so the outcome would almost be the same as the result shown by the silver mirror. Even if I were to go above the gray fog, I wouldn't obtain a better result. There's no way to determine the Desire Apostle's appearance. There are countless people in Backland with high cheekbones and blue eyes. As Klein was in the midst of his thoughts, the scene produced by the silver mirror quickly dispersed. Following that, words in blood red appeared. Based on the principle of reciprocity, it's my turn to ask the question. If you lie or are unable to answer, you will have to accept an arranged mission by me or suffer a penalty. Klein pricked up his brows when he saw that. Is this some truth or dare mirror? Interesting. The words which resembled dripping blood slowly changed into new characters, forming a new sentence. What is Red Light's true name? Red Light? One of the leaders of the Great White Brotherhood. One of the 7 pure lights above the spirit world. Klein thought through it carefully and realized he didn't know the answer. He only knew of Yellow Light, Venethan. Icancer's throat bobbed up and down as sweat gradually appeared on his forehead. After a brief moment of silence, he said in a deep voice, Nanides. Wrong. The blood-red words on the mirror changed again. Mission or penalty? There was an obvious struggle on Icancer's face. Finally, he breathed out and said, penalty. Just as he finished speaking, a streak of silver-white lightning appeared out of nowhere and struck his head. With sizzling sounds, Icancer's hair stood on their ends, and his body collapsed with a thud. Small amounts of black smoke billowed from his body. However, the mirror didn't fall to the ground with him. Instead, it floated by itself and landed on the desk. After 2 seconds, Icancer staggered to his feet and sat there, panting while shaking. Klein looked at everything in silence, unsure of how to react. After a while, Icancer, who had recovered a little, looked at him and said with a forced smile, you should have heard of sealed artifacts and know that they come with certain negative effects. Yes. Klein looked at the standing hair on Icancer's head and suddenly understood why his hairstyle was so frizzled, messy, and stubborn. Klein couldn't help but say, actually, you could do the questioning alone. There's no need for you to do it in front of me. Phew, the requirement of using this mirror is that there must be someone watching by the side. Icancer was still trembling. It's so sentient. Klein took 2 steps forward and came to the table. He carefully looked at the silver mirror out of curiosity and found that, apart from the strange patterns and 2 decorative eyes, there was nothing special about the sealed artifact. Icancer, whose side was facing him, trembled as he chuckled. You can pose questions to him. We don't mind. No, I don't have any intention to. How could Klein play truth or dare with something like an Ouija board? As he spoke, he tried to touch the edge of the silver mirror. It's ice cold to the touch and has a metallic feeling. As Klein had this thought, he saw the ancient silver mirror tremble slightly. White words quickly appeared on it, your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, at your service. Ah! Klein's mind momentarily went blank. Then, he left the table without any change in expression. What's going on? This mirror was still playing truth or dare with others in a very cold and ruthless manner just a moment ago. How did it become like this in the blink of an eye? Klein was amused and puzzled. He quickly made a guess based on the information he had gathered. The silver mirror knows Red Light's true name, so it seems to be related to the spirit world to a certain extent. And the mysterious space above the gray fog seems to be connected to the spirit world as well. At the very least, when I summon myself, I will be able to see what appears to be the spirit world after passing through the door. Is this mirror named Rhodes able to sense the aura of the gray fog? While these thoughts were flashing through his mind, Klein saw that Icancer had recovered and stood up once again. He grabbed the ancient silver mirror while the other 2 members in the room also stopped pretending that they hadn't seen anything while they were aimlessly searching the room. After a series of inspections, Klein bade Icancer and company farewell and found Isengard Stanton who had returned to the activity room. What do we do next? He asked directly. Isengard replied with a solemn expression. Let's have Stuart and the others have their families move in together. It will make it easier to protect them. However, this can only be a short-term solution. You and I, as well as Kislana, will act normally and receive secret protection. Let's hope the Desire Apostle can be found as soon as possible. You're a believer of the God of steam and machinery, right? Yes, Klein replied as he drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. At the same time, he lamented a little. For the foreseeable future, I can only go above the gray fog while inside the bathroom. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall. Audrey glanced at the elegantly shaped wall clock and slowly sat down in front of the dressing table despite her nervousness and excitement. She was heading to the home of her psychology teacher, Escalante, and take the key step of becoming an official member of the Psychology Alchemists. Before doing so, she needed to time herself well before praying to Mr. Fool for his help. I should be able to see the angel this time, right? Audrey thought with anticipation. After a few seconds of silence, she clasped her hands together in front of her mouth and nose and softly chanted the honorific name of the Fool. In 15, Minsk Street, Klein was standing in the living room, looking at the scene which had finally turned quiet as he sighed. To him, the Desire Apostle only meant danger, but to Stuart and the others, it was a change in their lives. I hope it can be settled as soon as possible. With so many Beyonders with so many sealed artifacts, there must be something effective against the devil pathway. In the midst of his thoughts, Klein suddenly heard a series of illusory pleas. It should be Miss Justice. Having been prepared, he looked around before walking to the bathroom as if nothing had happened. After locking the bathroom door, he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. My life has also changed a little. Before the threat of the Desire Apostle was eliminated, he had to reduce the times he went above the gray fog while being secretly protected by the machinery hive mind. Next week, during the Tarot Club, the itinerary must be simplified. However, no matter how compressed it is, it'll still take nearly 10 minutes. Well, constipation is a very normal thing. Who says that Beyonders can't be constipated? Being optimistic, Klein took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. Next, Audrey followed what she had been previously taught and set up a simple ritual, entering the artificial sleepwalking state. When Klein saw her blurry figure inside the Crimson Star, he went through the procedure, first using his spirit body to contain the Dark Emperor card, then picking up the paper figurine he cut with his improved cutting skills, and sending it out. As expected, the paper figurine gathered the power that was being stirred out of the gray fog, turning into a gigantic angel with 12 pairs of black wings. Audrey watched as the sacred and majestic angel descended before her, wrapping herself in its layers of wings. She was left speechless for quite some time. This is an angel, Mr. Fool's angel. And it even has 12 pairs of wings, an archangel. This is exactly the same as the descriptions in the legends of canon. This is also an angel of our tarot club. Audrey watched as the angel's silhouette rapidly faded away. She suddenly felt that it was exceptionally sweet. She thanked Mr. Fool with joy, excitement, and piousness, and then she called the maids and told them to get ready for her trip outdoors. Klein smiled and returned to the living room, looking at the bullet hole in the wall and lost himself in thought. Should I hang a cheap oil painting to cover it or repair it and paint over it? In Escalante's house at Hillston Borough, 7th Avenue. Audrey left her maid and bodyguard in the living room and followed the mistress of the house into the activity room with Susie, her huge golden retriever. In the activity room, there were 2 other people waiting. One of them was Hilbert Alucard, the psychologist who was introduced to her by Lady Norma. The other was Stephen Hamprez, who had organized the previous psychology discussion. At that moment, although it was already time for the banquet, there was only a single ordinary candle lit in the room. The candle was placed in the middle of the coffee table as its faint yellow flame flickered, dispersing the darkness in the activity room. After greeting each other, Hilbert, with his slightly brown skin that was thanks to the tiny bit of Southern Continent blood in him, glanced at Susie, but he didn't say a word. Audrey smiled apologetically and said, I feel more secure with it around. Susie also looked at Hilbert with innocent eyes. Understandable. Please have a seat. Hilbert smiled and sat down on the sofa on the other side of the coffee table. Hamprez and Escalante also took their seats. After Audrey had taken her seat, Hilbert lifted the candle wick to brighten it a little. He looked at Audrey through the candlelight. Now answer me honestly. Are you sure you want to join the psychology alchemists? Under the illumination of the candlelight, his eyes seemed to be dyed with a hint of gold. Deep within his pupils, there seemed to be another eye, a vertical eye. Audrey's mind suddenly turned adrift for a moment before she regained her senses. She lightly nodded and said, yes. Hilbert asked again, will you intentionally hurt the psychology alchemists? His tone carried a strange inducement, as though as long as the person being questioned gave an affirmative answer, they would unwittingly agree and abide by it from the bottom of their hearts. No, Audrey answered very logically. After a few questions, Hilbert, Escalante, and the others heaved sighs of relief. The former smiled and asked, is there anything else you would like to say? Audrey hesitated for a moment and then displayed her sincerity. I once purchased the spectator formula at a Beyonder gathering. I am already a spectator. That Beyonder gathering is called the Tarot Gathering. Audrey thought to herself proudly. Chapter 418, The Power of the Mind Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Audrey knew that her mind and psyche were being influenced by some kind of Beyonder power. It was only because of the angel's blessing, provided by Mr. Fool, that she was able to miraculously be immune to that state. Therefore, she decided to set certain things in motion, using small secrets to stun her counterparts, so as to hide the more crucial matters, in return for obtaining greater trust. The reason why she was doing this wasn't because she didn't believe in the angel, but because she felt that she could observe her counterparty just like how they were observing her. Although she had always hidden herself in the dark and pretended to not be considered a Beyonder, performing in a way which would not arouse suspicion, she was still more willing to take the members of the psychology alchemists seriously. After all, they were professionals, and she could only be considered a dabbler in the Beyonder circle. She lacked the experience and wasn't flexible enough. It was very possible that she would expose certain problems from things she had yet to realize. In that case, she might as well take this opportunity to confess and completely dispel some of the doubts of the psychology alchemists' members. She had called the descent of the angel and its envelopment of her with its wings as a blessing. Upon hearing Audrey's reply, both Escalante and Hamprez showed a brief look of surprise. For a moment, they even doubted their own powers. As for Hilbert, he curled the corners of his lips into a faint smile, showing no abnormal reaction. He nodded in satisfaction and gently said, "Your honesty is admirable." "Anything else?" Audrey pretended to be in a trance as she shook her head. "There isn't anything else." Hilbert thought for a moment before asking a few more questions. "Which Beyonder gathering did you buy the spectator formula from? Who did you buy it from? Where did you get the ingredients for concocting the potion?" Audrey's eyes darted around slightly as she showed an expression of recalling. "I have to keep the Beyonder gathering a secret. I was unable to see what the person who sold me the spectator formula looks like. But from the way he speaks, I could determine that he was a believer of the Lord of Storms." Upon hearing that, Hilbert nodded slightly, as though he recalled something. Audrey continued, "My spectator potion ingredients were mainly found from my family's vault. The rest were exchanged from my few friends." 2 spectator potions, she added silently. Most of them were found from her family's vault. Hilbert, Escalante, and Hamprez ruminated over the words, momentarily at a loss for words. After a few seconds, Hilbert nodded to Escalante and Hamprez, indicating that he found everything all right. After receiving the same reply from the rest, the gold tinge in his eyes faded, and the vertical pupil in his eyes faded rapidly. Hilbert touched the wick of the candle again, causing the flame to flicker. In that instance of alternating light and darkness, Audrey discovered that the strange power that affected her had suddenly disappeared. She controlled her adrift expression and switched to an appearance of doubt and inquiry. I didn't expect you to already be a spectator. Hilbert chuckled. Ha! Audrey showed her surprise and panic at the right moment. Knowing what kind of emotional reaction to show in the appropriate situation and knowing, in detail, what kind of expression and body language to react with was the basic skill of a telepathist. Hilbert smiled and said, "There's no need to be nervous. We don't mind. That was the last of our tests. Congratulations, you have passed all the tests. Now, you're an official member of our psychology alchemists." "All right then." Audrey hesitated, then she smiled. It felt like a dream. She then stood up, lifted the edges of her skirt, and bowed at Hilbert and the others. She then said with a faint smile, "We are now companions." Escalante and the others immediately stood up and bowed to the beautiful girl of noble status who was so polite to them. After the two sat back down, Hilbert organized his words and said, "Miss Audrey, I'm going to formally explain to you about the situation of the psychology alchemists." "All right," Audrey said with a smile. "Just call me by my name." Hilbert nodded. Leaning back, he crossed his right leg and clasped his hands. The original Psychology Alchemists was just a seminar for enthusiasts who all believed that the mind has limitless power and infinite wonders. Later on, this seminar obtained a treasure map and found the relics left behind by Hermes. Hermes of the Hermes language? Audrey asked in excitement. Yes, he was one of the earliest masters of mysticism from the human race, and the language of ancient Hermes that he created resonated with the power of nature. He was active during the Dark Second Epoch. Back then, humans were only the servants and slaves of giants, Hilbert said with utmost reverence. He let out a soft sigh. The original members of the Psychology Alchemists found a lot of things from the ruins. They discovered that Hermes was a mysticism master in the field of the mind. His research target was the dragons that ruled the sky during the Second Epoch. To be precise, the dragons of the mind. The information he left behind shows that mind dragons have advanced far into this field and have achieved the same level of achievement as deities. I know. The dragon of imagination Enkwelt was an ancient god. Audrey thought quite complacently. Hilbert sighed and said, "Those materials laid the foundation and direction for the research of our psychology alchemists. We believe that the mind has many secrets and that every one of them is hidden somewhere deep and difficult to grasp." Forgive me for using the adjective deep, which seems to be the most appropriate term to me. The slightest mistake in the study of those secrets would cause irreversible harm to the body. Audrey, you have to remember that matters in this aspect needs to be done carefully. After Audrey nodded, he continued. If we can unravel the secrets of the mind, then we can, on the one hand, unearth the power hidden deep in one's consciousness, and accomplish many miraculous deeds, and on the other hand, we can influence or even control the minds of others. After reaching this level, what lies ahead is the sea of gathered collective subconsciousness, which is the place we look forward to the most. Of course, the description of a collective subconsciousness isn't accurate enough. I prefer to call it the mind world of all living beings. It has a veiled and miraculous connection to the spirit world. If one can master this mind world, what kind of beyonder powers would we obtain? Audrey showed her curiosity at the right moment and her lack of knowledge in this area. Hilbert smiled and said, "You should have noticed some of the wonderful phenomena in the real world. When we wish to receive something, it will happen to appear. When we want to visit a friend, they will happen to knock on the door. And when we desire something to happen, it begins at that exact moment. You might say it's a coincidence, but sometimes there are too many coincidences. Our research shows that many of these coincidences are caused by an unconscious, magical influence of the mind. When you master the mind world, which is also the sea that gathers the collective subconscious, then you will master coincidences, creating magical phenomena that make chance appearances as an echo of your mind. It will appear as you wish. This is too amazing." Audrey had heard the son mention the dragon of nightmare before, but the description was far less detailed than Hilbert's. Hilbert chuckled and said, "At our level, it's better not to discuss such a deep and profound question. If we do, we'll easily lose ourselves. I'll continue introducing the psychology alchemists." The discovery of the ruins marked the establishment of the organization. The members at the beginning wanted to maintain a state of pure academic discussion, but they would always need help when encountering matters. Similarly, they lack items and research materials. That's why the psychology alchemists slowly became systematic and transformed into a real secret organization. However, compared to other secret organizations, our structure and relationships are still relatively loose. "That's what I like about it," Audrey expressed her opinion. Hilbert explained the main rules and regulations, before finally concluding, "When you reach a higher rank, you'll be able to meet the other members. I'll now give you the Sequence 8 Telepathist Potion." They did prepare a telepathist potion as expected. Audrey was both glad and proud. After seeing the lustrous potion, she hesitated and said, "I wish to consume it after I get back." She still doesn't trust us, and she wishes to make confirmation. Hilbert read Audrey's thoughts and replied with a smile, "Okay. With your performance, drinking the telepathist potion shouldn't be a problem." Audrey beamed and thanked him before asking a probing question, "Can you give me the potion formula to psychiatrist? I wish to seek out and gather the ingredients ahead of time, so that I don't waste any time." When other people join the psychology alchemists, other than hoping to get a formula, don't they hope to apply for the corresponding Beyonder ingredients? Who says it in such a carefree manner and talk about trying to gather them ahead of time? Hilbert, Hamprez, and Escalante were speechless for a while as they looked at the girl who spoke of such things with a normal tone. A few seconds later, Hilbert forced out a smile. "I'll help you make the application. Normally, this would require contribution points, and contribution points come from the missions we assign you, the research contributions you make, and the new information and materials you gather." "Okay, I'll do my best," Audrey said briskly. She remained silent after leaving Escalante's house, but only until she entered her room and sent Annie and the others away did she turn to the huge golden retriever and smile. "Susie, we got your potion. It's a pity that the rainbow salamander that Alfred found for me couldn't be of use. It can only be exchanged for money." Audrey sighed emotively in her heart. Susie looked at the bottle containing the telepathist potion and wagged her tail cheerfully. Audrey had hung a pair of gold-rimmed glasses around her neck just for laughs. Hillston Borough. In Isengard Stanton's house. Klein had been invited to breakfast. Apart from him, Kislana was invited as well. After eating a mouthful of the soft potato pie, Klein praised, "Mr. Stanton, your cooking skills are excellent." Isengard, who had gray hair at his temples, smiled and said, "It's a specialty of Lenberg." And to the Beyonders of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, being multi-talented is a common trait. Its sequence 6 is called polymath. It's easy for people to lose control for the corresponding potion. Until now, I still don't have the confidence to make the advancement attempt. Chapter 419 Polymath. This sequence sounds strong just from its name. The Reader Pathways Sequence 7 is called Knowledge Keeper or Detective. It's a job that leans towards grasping knowledge and deduction. At most, it would be accompanied by decent combat techniques and the ability to use machinery, so it cannot be considered powerful. But at Sequence 6, there seems to be a sudden qualitative change, especially more so in the field of Beyonder combat. From the looks of it, each Beyonder pathway has its own critical point below the high sequences, but it isn't fixed at a particular sequence. For example, the Seer pathway's critical point is Magician. Klein drank a mouthful of hot coffee and didn't try probing on the secrets to other sequences. Instead, he smiled and said, "Mr. Stanton, you seem to be quite relaxed. You're not nervous or worried at all." Isengard didn't answer immediately. He put down his knife and fork, took out his pipe, and said, "You don't mind, right?" "Actually, I do, but the pollution and smog in Backlund is already so bad that a few more puffs of second-hand smoke won't make it any worse. Klein shook his head and smiled. This aids in your thinking. More accurately, it's a habit that I have after breakfast every day. Done with his pipe, Isengard took a deep drag. As the smoke was exhaled, he sighed and said, "Fear, nervousness, and worry doesn't help us face the threat. In that case, why not take it a little easier? The brain will become more active because of this." My assistant easily got worried, which led to his fatal disaster. Sigh, Isengard glanced at Kislana and continued, "Furthermore, our opponent is a desire apostle. We have to refrain from having intense emotions." Having said that, he chuckled. "Most importantly, we have no other means of locating the desire apostle. What do we do?" Kislana put down the last piece of bacon and asked seriously. Isengard took a drag and said in a self-deprecating manner, "When discussing topics like this, I prefer reclining chairs. Apart from being able to sense danger, devils aren't good at divination or premonition. Therefore, if a desire apostle wishes to figure out the main revenge target, he would need to actively investigate and gather information. Otherwise, how would he know which group of private detectives had made considerable contributions to the serial murder? How was he able to precisely pinpoint you and me? In such a process, he definitely would have interacted with many people. Even in a disguise, he's bound to leave some clues. In addition to the rough image given by the machinery hive mind, this will form clues. Similarly, if he wants to attack me, then he has to find out where I live, what are my entry and exit patterns, as well as when I work or rest. He also needs to know if there are powerful official beyonders protecting me. This requires a considerable observation period and corresponding inquiries, and similarly, this means interacting with others and certain locations. Once there's an interaction, there will be clues. I like the maxim, wherever he steps, whatever he touches, whatever he leaves, even unconsciously, will serve as a silent witness against him. I know that sentence. It was said by Emperor Roselle. Klein smiled. Soon after, he felt a little despondent, because this was the second time he heard someone mention this maxim in this world. The last time it happened was when he was in Tingen. Kislana, whose cheeks were drooping, sighed. As expected of a great detective. I never thought about such things. I admire your observation and reasoning skills. Isengard responded with a smile, everyone has their own areas of expertise. If it's just fighting, then I would be defeated by you again and again. Sherlock must have also thought of the things I just said. He also has outstanding observation and reasoning skills, and he's an outstanding detective. Actually, I felt a little ashamed when you were speaking so confidently earlier. Klein squeezed out a smile. No, you're a true detective, and I'm still a long way off. You really are a modest young man. Isengard sighed. He smiled and said, next up, we'll proceed by taking these points in mind. You'll have to use your own resources and information channels. Aside from the Tarot Club, a third of my resources and information channels in Backlund are from you, my good old man. Klein forced a smile and replied, all right. Apart from the Beyonder gathering held by Eye of Wisdom, the only people he could seek help from were Marek, Miss Sharon, Vampire Emlyn White and Father Utravsky. With the machinery hive mind secretly protecting me, I'll have to eliminate Miss Sharon and Marek. I can visit Emlyn the vampire as he's now a half-believer of Mother Earth, and is under the protection of Bishop Utravsky. He wouldn't encounter any danger from the official Beyonders. Klein instantly decided on the direction to take. Kislana remained silent for a few seconds before replying, no problem. Klein wiped the remaining cream onto the last bit of toast, chewed, and swallowed it at a leisurely pace before asking, Mr. Stanton, you previously mentioned the activation of a particular sealed artifact. Will it be able to help us deal with the Desire Apostle? Yes, it played a critical role in finding and surrounding the devil dog back then, Isengard replied frankly. Its code name is 1 to 42. 1 to 42. A Grade 1 sealed artifact is highly dangerous and can only be used in limited ways. Even the Backlund diocese can only keep 1 or 2 items. A corresponding description flashed across Klein's mind, and he asked with great interest, "What is it? What abilities and negative effects does it have?" Isengard laughed and said, "That is a secret of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. I do not know, and I only know that it was originally not in Backlund. It was rushed here as an emergency because of the serial murders. It is said that it's a full-body armor which is silver in color with dark red blood stains. It once caused the destruction of a small city, and over 100,000 people died because of it." Cursed armor? Klein asked in return by giving it a name. Isengard spewed a mouthful of smoke and shook his head in seriousness. "Perhaps it isn't cursed. Some people call it Berserker's armor or Bloodthirster's armor. My church once guessed that the blood it stained with comes from a deity from ancient times. When it was first discovered, it appeared to be nothing out of the ordinary. It was treated as a simple antique, sold and collected by others. But as time passed, those who came into contact with it died, one after another. It was an extremely terrifying death, nearly to the point of dismemberment, and after that, with it as the center, death spread outwards. There was no longer any need for contact, and as such, a small city was destroyed. This happened early in the 5th epoch. The Nighthawks were responsible for the aftermath. As expected of a Beyonder from the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. He knows enough history and Beyonder events. Klein secretly praised. Kislana asked, sounding a little worried, "Will it bring us danger?" The Church of the Evernight Goddess definitely found the right way of sealing it, but for us, it's best if we avoid contact as much as possible, Isengard said, half as consolement and half as a warning. After breakfast, he and Klein went into the activity room where the fight had taken place. Kislana first headed to the bathroom. Looking at her back, Klein thoughtfully said, "She seems to be a Beyonder from the Arbiter pathway. Your observation skills are indeed outstanding." Isengard sat down in the reclining chair. As Klein walked to the sofa, he whispered in confusion, "This pathway is strictly controlled by the royal family, the military, and the ancient nobles. Very few formulas and ingredients appear in the outside world. Kislana has such a background." Isengard smiled and said, "Quite obviously. However, even to this point, she hasn't taken the initiative to mention the relevant matters. This implies that there really is a reason that makes it somewhat inconvenient for her to mention it." He looked at Klein with a smile in his eyes, as if to say, "Aren't you the same as well?" Klein laughed dryly and sat down. After a while, Kislana came to the activity room and continued discussing the matter regarding the Desire Apostle with Klein and Isengard. As she was speaking, her expression suddenly became gloomy and she sighed. "I was pulled into the most dangerous case this time. I have no idea if I'll survive this at the end. If I were to be killed by the Desire Apostle, I wish to have this on my tombstone, she had a great mother." Kislana's voice gradually lowered as her difficult-to-get-along-with personality seemed to soften. Isengard shared the same sentiments and nodded. "Similarly, he's the most dangerous enemy I've encountered." He then laughed and said, "If I die because of this, and both of you are still alive, would you be willing to help me deliver my remains to the Holy Temple of Knowledge in Lenberg? Stop raising death flags." Klein's mouth was half open, and he didn't know how to stop the two detectives in front of him. "No problem, but I hope this day will never come." He tried his best to dispel the thought. Isengard glanced at him and asked curiously, "Sherlock, what about you? If you were killed by the Desire Apostle, what wish do you have that you hope others can fulfill for you?" "Revive me." Klein sighed and said, "I hope that I can be buried in a cemetery with good scenery. It's best if my corpse is intact and is sprinkled with holy water and fresh flowers." The core meaning of his words was, "Do not cremate me." The three of them fell silent for a while until they heard the tinkling sound of the doorbell. The visitor was the deacon named Cancer Bernard from the machinery hive mind. His hair was stubbornly squeezing out from the brim of his hat, giving his deep, masculine outline an indescribably messy feeling. This time, he wasn't holding the silver mirror named a Rhodes. It was unknown where he had put it. If I have a chance, I wouldn't mind using that magic mirror to see how my loyal and humble servant would react. Klein thought. Cancer didn't enter. He stood there, looking at the detective trio. He then quickly said in a deep voice, "There's a clue to the Desire Apostle." Chapter 420, Devil Family Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Westboro, 6, Edward Street. Cancer Bernard pressed down on his black hat, pointed at the door behind the fountain, and said to Klein, Isengard, and Kaslana, "We have reverse investigated the various information channels for any leaks of news or information. Combined with the outline of their side profile, as well as getting the help of the magic mirror, we managed to have a preliminary suspect." You obviously paused for a moment when you mentioned the magic mirror. I wonder what price you paid to get the answer you wanted. Klein sensed the problem in Cancer's tone and felt a baffling hint of sympathy for him. It's the owner of this house? Kaslana returned with a question, sounding almost certain. Isengard Stanton looked around and said, as if pondering, "You chose to inform us directly because you found another piece of evidence?" "Yes, the portrait of the house's owner proves some of it." He never takes photographs," Cancer answered frankly. "Besides, the people around here have seen a big black dog in the neighborhood many times in the past. This can basically prove that the suspect is that Desire Apostle." Having said this, Isengard couldn't help but laugh. "Sorry, we were too anxious and didn't give you a chance to introduce the suspect." As he walked around the fountain and toward the front door of the house, Cancer quickly said, "The owner of this house is Patrick Jason, the principal shareholder of a small bank. According to the description from his neighbors, he's a cheerful, enthusiastic, and optimistic middle-aged man who has remained a bachelor, but it is believed that he had several mistresses. At this level of wealth, the number of servants he hires is utterly inadequate. Every time a banquet or ball is held, he would need to hire a batch of temporary attendants from the City Family Servant Assistance Association. In regards to this, his explanation is due to a problem of insomnia. Too many servants will affect the silence he needs. I can tell that he has many secrets which need hiding, so he doesn't dare to hire too many servants," Isengard said half-jokingly. Klein, who didn't hire a single servant, said somewhat guiltily, "Perhaps it's simply because his finances aren't as good as others think." "Yes, that's a factor that cannot be ruled out." Isengard stepped up to the porch and came in front of the main door. Cancer looked at Klein and said as if in enlightenment, "You don't hire servants and only have your landlord's maid do temporary cleaning twice a week. Is it to conceal the secret that you're a beyonder?" "Of all my secrets, that is the most trivial one." Klein deliberately smiled bitterly and said, "Yes." As they spoke, Cancer pushed open the front door, and an indescribable stench drifted out. The smell of decay. Isengard made a judgment in an instant. Cancer called over a machinery hive mind team member. "Carlson, any discoveries?" The beyonder, Carlson, wore thick glasses and had a complicated expression on his face. "We found a lot of bodies here. In the cement in the basement, in the thick walls, and in the places where the garden is overgrown with weeds, one hidden corpse after another was found. The earliest could be from more than a decade ago, and the latest are the servants who were still alive a few days ago. Some of them are just bones, some slightly rotten. Deacon, this place is like a human slaughterhouse." As he spoke, the machinery hive mind members and the carefully selected police officers behind him carried out one corpse after another. Some of the corpses were dismembered. Tongues, fingers, stomach bags, eyes, etc. were all lying in disarray. Some of the corpses were only bones. It looks like many of Backlund's disappearance cases will be solved because of this. Isengard pinched his nose and sighed. When Klein saw an intestine which was almost dragged across the ground, he exhaled and turned to look around the house. Machinery Hivemind member, Carlson, muttered again, Jason paid his servants very high wages and gave them a lot of holidays. The servants living around him were all very envious. Jason's cook even promised his child that he would be home this week and take him to the circus to watch a performance. A true devil. Kaslana was slightly perturbed. Looking around, Klein restrained his emotions and solemnly asked, why are the furnishings of the house so simple and crude? As a banker, even if the bank he owns isn't big, Jason should have had expensive porcelain, excellent paintings, luxurious wall clocks, and all sorts of items made of high-quality silk. Why can't we see any of that here? Well, the wood for his furniture is still pretty good. Carlson glanced at Deacon Acancer, and after receiving an assenting nod, he said, it's clear that Jason had planned this revenge for a long time. He sold the valuable but inconspicuous items in the house, and he had even agreed to the Varvat Bank's purchase of his estate. After killing his servants, he sped up his liquidation and sold the oil painting and other items. He appeared to be certain that he would definitely be found, and he didn't have any thoughts of getting lucky. Before taking action, all he had left was his house, furniture, and identity. It's unknown where he had moved large quantities of cash, precious metals, and jewelry to. After listening to Carlson's description, Klein suddenly thought of a few adjectives: calm, rational, crazy. A true devil, Isengard evaluated before sharing his deductions. He is clear-headed and calm in his actions, but he has a strong crazy tendency and a spirit of adventure, which is characteristic of the past two deeds. Therefore, we have to be wary of him taking risks. Klein grasped the gist of Detective Stanton's words. Yes. Isengard gravely nodded. Next, the few detectives searched the house and found a lot of evidence to prove that Patrick Jason was problematic. They also saw the portrait hanging in the activity room. It depicted a middle-aged man with tall cheekbones, blue eyes with a tiny of gray, ordinary facial features, and neatly combed hair. He didn't have any special features. At that moment, Acancer came in and said to Klein and the others, we found some items in a secret chamber that confirms that Jason Patrick had attempted to summon an even more powerful devil, but for some reason, he didn't succeed. And those items have confirmed his identity. He's a member of the devil family known as Beria, so his real name should be Jason Beria. The Beria family? Klein nodded, unsurprised. In the ancient Fourth Epoch, the human faction that worshipped devils formed a scattered alliance known as the Blood Sanctify sect. This organization was internally divided quite drastically. The three great devil families of Noise, Anariel, and Beria were a tripartite balance of forces. Their ancestors once received the bestowment of the Abyss, and they worship an evil god by the name Dark Side of the Universe. They believe that he is the ruler of the Abyss and that he is the devastator of the world who would corrupt and degenerate the real world's entire universe. Isengard introduced to the unaffiliated Beyonders, Kaslana and Klein. Acancer shook his head and added, if a deeply divided organization doesn't eventually split, integration and unification are inevitable trends. Various situations and rumors indicate that the Beria and Anariel families have gradually weakened since at least 1,000 years ago, to the point of becoming vassals of the Noise family in recent decades. Well, the Beria family's symbol is the abstract symbol combination of a pentagram and goat horns. Regardless, the Beria family is still an extremely ancient family with deep roots. It's no wonder Jason was able to raise a devil dog. Sigh, that's just one of the reasons. Another reason is that he owns a bank, even if it wasn't big. In the Second Epoch, the ancient god that corresponds to the dark side of the universe is Devil Monarch, Farbody. Is there any connection between the two? Klein sighed while feeling curious. After much searching, the three detectives and the Machinery Hivemind members could only confirm that Jason Patrick was the Desire Apostle, but they were unable to find the man's current location. On the pretext of getting help from others, Klein took a handkerchief that Jason had used during the devil summoning ritual, with plans on finding a chance to divine above the gray fog. After all, Jason had dealt with the items he often came into contact with. Shortly after, a cancer came to them and said with a heavy expression, "The Nighthawks will be bringing that sealed artifact here. We will be making a move first." "All right," Isengard and Kaslana answered at the same time. As for Klein, he had long since raised his hands and feet in approval inwardly. After exiting Jason's villa, which occupied a large area, Klein looked back and his expression gradually turned grim. He said doubtfully, "I think there's a problem." "What problem?" Kaslana hurriedly asked. Klein deliberated and said, "He sold the bank, his business, and many valuable items ahead of time. That means that Jason is prepared to give up his current identity and life. If his motive is solely to seek revenge on the devil dog, it's not sufficient to initiate such a series of actions. Maybe he had a very deep relationship with the devil dog." "Sherlock, you might not think so, but I've seen people who treat pets as family," Kaslana said in disagreement. Isengard, who was standing beside them, solemnly said, "No, Sherlock is quite right. Kaslana, do you know what the ancient name of the Devil Pathways Sequence 8 is?" Kaslana revealed a look of contemplation. She had apparently heard of it, but she couldn't immediately recall it. At that moment, Klein answered for her in a low voice, "Cold-blooded." Cold-blooded. As she mulled over the name, she suddenly understood why the two great detectives, Moriarty and Stanton, would say so. Seeing her reaction, Klein pointed in another direction. "Let's split up and begin with our own information channels." After receiving an affirmative response from Isengard and Kaslana, he left in a hurry. However, he didn't rush south of the bridge to find Emlyn White. He wanted to head to the Chisak police station and retrieve the £50 he posted as bail. He has already been proven to be without problems. Both Isengard Stanton and the official Beyonders had given their respective testimonies.